Hi, I'm Akis, a developer here at FlyRank. Today, I walk you through a REST authentication API built with Next.js and Supabase Auth. We'll see the complete authentication flow, including sign-up, login, JWT-based authentication, protected routes, Swagger documentation, and a small folder that consumes the same API. We'll start with the finished project, then I'll explain how it was built step by step by walking through the commit history. Let's begin with the user interface. First, I will start the server. It's running on localhost 3000. Then I will open the developer tools and the network app under the effects XHR. The application starts with a simple authentication page where users can either create an account or sign in using their email and password. I'll create a new account. After submitting the folder first calls post of sign up to create a user. As soon as it succeeds, it calls post of login to obtain an access token and a refresh token. These tokens are stored in local storage, where we can see from the application and local storage, automatically included as bearer tokens on future API requests. Now, once authentication succeeds, we are directed to the dashboard page. The dashboard immediately calls to protected endpoints, the get protected profile, and the get protected dashboard. These endpoints return the authenticated user's information together with some personalized dashboard data. Now switching back to Supabase admin, we can see under the authentication page that the user is actually created. If the access token is missing or is invalid, this returns 404 unauthorized requests, and the folder redirects the user back to the login page. Now, finally, I'll sign out, and the folder calls post auth logout, clears the local stored tokens, and returns us to the authentication page. The important thing to notice is that the frontend doesn't contain any spatial authentication logic. It's simply consuming the REST API, exactly like Swagger or any other client would. Now let's look at the API itself through Swagger. The project exposes interactive documentation at /docs, generated from an OpenAPI 3 specification. This allows us to explore every endpoint and test the API directly from the browser. Let's start with the public endpoints. The first one is getPublicInfo. As you can see, this endpoint doesn't require authentication, so anyone can call it. Next are the authentication endpoints, post-auth signup and post-auth login, which authenticates the user and returns both an access token and a refresh token. Once authorized, we can access the protected endpoints. The get protected profile returns information about the authenticated user, and get protected dashboard returns personalized dashboard data. Finally, post-auth logout ends the user's authenticated session. The raw OpenAPI specification is also available at /openapi.json, making it easy to generate clients or integrate with other tools. Now let's look behind the scenes. Rather than building everything at once, the project was developed incrementally. Each commit introduced a single concept, making it easy to understand how the application evolved. The first stage creates the project foundation. We start with a standard Next.js application using the app router and TypeScript, and we configure the Supabase client and other required environment variables. At this point, there are no authentication endpoints yet, just the infrastructure we'll build on. Next, on stage 1, we implement the first authentication endpoints. Post of signup uses Supabase's signup API to create new users, while post of login authenticates existing users using sign-in with password and returns JWT token. This gives us the complete onboarding flow that everything else depends on. Now on stage 2, with authentication working, we introduce the concept of public and protected endpoints. The public route is accessible to everyone, while the protected profile endpoint is introduced as the place where authentication will eventually be enforced. At this stage, the route structure exists, but the authentication logic is still minimal. In stage 3, we add real JWT verification. The profile endpoint now reads the bearer token validated through Supabase and either returns the authenticated user or responds with 401 unauthorized. The authentication logic still lives directly inside the route, which works, but it isn't reusable yet. Stage 4 is the biggest architectural improvement in the project. Instead of repeating authentication logic in every route, we move it into a reusable middleware called with-auth. The middleware extracts the bearer token, verifies it with Supabase, and passes the authenticated user to the route handler. If authentication fails, it immediately returns a 401 unauthorized. Now, every protected endpoint becomes very small because it only contains business logic. This stage also introduces post of logout, completing the authentication lifecycle. On stage 5, with the API complete, we add documentation. The project now exposes an OpenAPI specification together with Swagger UI, including a bearer authentication scheme that lets developer test protected endpoints directly from the browser. Documentation and implementation now stay synchronized. The next stage focuses on developer experience. The README now explains how to install the project, configure the environment variables, start the server, authenticate through Swagger, and test its endpoints. The repository is now ready to be shared. Now we built a frontend on top of the API. The React application provides sign-up and login forms together with a small API client that stores JWT tokens and automatically includes them in future requests. It's using exactly the same endpoints we've already demonstrated in Swagger. The final stage completes the user experience. The dashboard automatically loads the authenticated user's profile and dashboard data when the page opens. If authentication expires, the user is directed back to the login page. Logging out removes the stored tokens and ends the session. At this point, we've concluded the full authentication loop from the API to the documentation to the frontend. Let's quickly recap what we've built. We created a complete authentication system using Next.js, route handlers, and Supabase Auth, with JWT-based authentication, protected endpoints, a reusable authentication middleware, interactive Swagger documentation, and a React frontend that consumes the same API. Because the project was developed incrementally, every commit represents a clear milestone, from the initial setup all the way to a complete production-style authentication flow. Thank you for watching, and please let us know of any questions.